Hi, everyone. Welcome to Science in the Time of Corona, where we talk about what it's like for scientists to conduct research during a pandemic. My name is Layla. I'm a senior anthropology major at Reed College, and I'm interested in learning about and sharing the daily lives of scientists. So over the last few months, many people have wondered about how the pandemic has influenced parents, and especially mothers, who tend to bear more responsibility in the household. Many articles have been published investigating whether the publishing gap between men and women in science has widened during the pandemic, as people must work from home. And their findings have shown that, in fact, the publishing gap between men and women has widened during the pandemic. So with this as our backdrop, today we'll hear about the daily experiences of two women scientists during the pandemic. Are there lessons that we can learn from this time that might help promote equity in science in the future, or have there been any positive changes that have come with these new working conditions? I hope that this conversation can promote a better understanding of the individual impact that COVID-19 has had on everyone, and show that it's important to pay attention to everyone's specific circumstances during this time. If you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, please ask your questions in the comment section. We would love to have you all be part of this conversation. So could each of you introduce yourselves and just say a little bit about your expertise?
Thank you, Layla, for inviting me to participate and for discussing this very important topic. My name is Danica Fujimori. I'm a faculty member in cellular and molecular pharmacology and pharmaceutical chemistry. My lab investigates modifications of cellular components. We are particularly interested in disease-causative modifications, and particularly those that present in cancer and infectious disease. And in addition to mechanisms of enzymes that regulate modifications, we are also developing drug-like molecules to perturb their cellular functions.
My name is Ruth Hüttenheim, she, her, hers. I'm an assistant adjunct professor at UCSF in the cellular and molecular pharmacology. My research, the research of my group, focuses on a method called mass spectrometry-based proteomics, which essentially measures proteins. And specifically, we develop and apply these methods to understand diverse biomedical questions, such as how mutations in genes lead to a disease phenotype, how the mechanisms, how viruses infect cells and replicate in cells, but also how drugs or how cells respond to a drug treatment. So there's a variety of questions that we are interested in answering using these technologies.
Nice. And I think that probably a lot of people in the general public might not have a great sense of what scientists' daily lives look like, which is part of the reason for this show. And especially right now, it's hard to think about what a scientist's life might look like, especially since we think about science as something that has to happen in a lab. So I would love to hear just what your daily lives have looked like over the last few months.
Well, they have substantially changed for most of us, especially for those of us that, as you pointed out, have dependent care responsibilities. So since March, my children have been staying at home for their distance learning, and then, of course, summer break, and more recently, beginning of the new school year, which is really changing my ability to work from my office, where I came in today, but commonly I do work from home. At the same time, our scientific investigations in the lab have only expanded, in part thanks to joint efforts of coronavirus research group within QBI. So it's increased workload and decreased time to do that work.
Yeah, my experience over the last months is similar than Danica. So I have a a 2-year-old child, and he's my son. The daycare was closed starting from mid-March, I think. So that means that I was fully working from home, sharing childcare duties, likely sharing childcare duties with my husband. So which means a decline in working hours. I have to say that I feel very fortunate that since 2.5 months the childcare or the daycare reopened, and that was really a game changer. So I could really see what the difference is when working from home when my child is here, which is, well, technically I was sharing with my husband, so working 50%, but if there's a child running around trying to constantly have your attention, it's not that you can really focus these hours at home. And so now it's a big difference, and working from home is I can really focus on work. My child is not here during the day, and that made the difference. Otherwise, in terms of what has changed over the last months, it's like there's also quite a lot of change in the Krogan lab that I'm associated with, because we invest, like Danica mentioned, we invest a lot of time also in coronavirus research, and my team has partially also contributed to that. But at the same time, I had also from February till now 3 new people starting, so that also was a change for me to see how can we integrate the team. So I spent and how can I get them all up to speed. So I spend a lot of time, which I like to do, with mentoring them and trying to help them to get going their project in this new situation where you have only reduced capacity in the lab, and I'm not around to help, because I literally spend probably 95% of my time working from home. So that was a big change.
Yeah, that's a lot of big changes. And so going back to these articles that have been published about the widening publishing gap, particularly the one from Nature that was published early on in the pandemic that showed the widening gap between men and women after quarantine. What are your thoughts on this? Just sort of initial impressions.
Yeah, maybe I can start. So yeah, as you pointed out, there have been recent studies, and that's great that they're investigating the impact on women, and specifically on also parents with dependents. And I think that that it has shown that there's a strong decrease in productivity, especially for women with young kids. And while I don't want to say that, I mean, this also affects, obviously, fathers, they also take responsibility. Unfortunately, we are still in a society where much of the childcare duties are taken over by women, so they are more affected. And also recent study shows not only decrease in working hours, but also you can see that already on the publication record, which I think it's kind of alarming that you see this even in a short time scale, you see this effect already. So there's a 20% decrease on female first authors and a 5% decrease on female last authors in publication. When you look at publications that were recently published, so all focused on coronavirus, so you can assure that they happened really during the pandemic, comparing to like publications that have been published last year in similar journals. So it has already, even these are, it's like few months already, it has already such a strong impact. And I think this is a trend for me. This is highly concerning. I feel there's we are trying to promote women in science, but that's clearly alarming. And I think we don't even have right now a sense of how this will affect the career trajectory of women in science, especially because when you think about it, that even without the pandemic, we already have to face inequity and barriers for career development. So I think that's something really that needs to consider strongly and trying to find solutions. Because not only looking at these publications right now, this will affect and also grant writing. So there will be less publications for women. There will be less grants, and I think these are all the important metrics that are evaluated for deciding for tenure track.
I fully agree with what Ruth said, that widening productivity gap, both in publications and in grants secured by women since the beginning of the quarantine, sadly has a potential to erase hardly won victories that women in academia have gained over decades of efforts towards equity in science. So just seeing that few months have had such a major impact to me is very concerning, knowing that current situation is continuing into fall and winter.
Yeah, definitely. And to get a better idea of kind of a more detailed view of how this is affecting parents in science, I would love to hear from each of you how whether every sort of aspect of your research has been impacted equally by the move to working from home, or whether there have been some parts that have been able to remain the same and others that have changed quite a bit.
To me, the greatest impact that pandemic has had so far is the ability to directly interact with members of my lab. And that, to me, is the most rewarding part of this job. And while Zoom replaces some aspects of it, it really is not the same as talking with members of the lab while they're in the lab and having the community to discuss ideas in real time and address them and really enhance our research in that way. At the same time, the community as a whole has been really quick to adopt to Zoom communication, and in particular in QCRG efforts, we've been able to subgroup really fast and in that way compensate for the loss of the ability to meet in person. So while there are some negatives, there are some positives in our changed communication as well. Major one perhaps being no lack of need for commute with our virtual meetings.
Yeah, my experience is very similar in what Danica shared. I miss the direct social interactions in the lab with team members. As I said, we had, it's just like, I think I have doubled the people in my team now, and it's like, it's really sad that I cannot be there and see them on a more daily basis and interact with them, get them, talk with them about the projects. I feel similar that we have found alternative ways for communicating. That's actually a good part. I think it's like having now more flexibility, and I think it works well. We would use a combination of Zoom and Slack, and I think it's even though it's not in person, it helps to connect us, even though we are not physically in the same place. However, I also think it's something to carefully consider that this, I think, favors people that are more extrovert than introvert. So I think that can be an issue, and I think needs to be considered when thinking about that. Otherwise, what I think has changed for me personally also is that before the pandemic, for shelter in place, I would still do some experiments, which I also enjoy, but I think I'm also in the stage that I should change more and do less of it. And so it was basically a forced change, that I did this transition back, away from the bench, more to mentoring my team, obviously thinking about writing grants and thinking about new projects, even though that was not easy with having a limited amount of time. But that was a I think also a change for me, and I would say a positive change for me, that I was rather thinking about how can I help my team members to be more independent and enabling them and basically providing them more responsibility. So I think it was a forced transition away from the bench.
Yeah, and sort of from a non-scientist perspective, one aspect that I feel that I would anticipate might change quite a bit is conferences, since you don't have to travel for several days and be away from home, I would anticipate that that might make it easier for parents to attend conferences. But I wonder if that has actually turned out to be true, or how that pans out in real life.
Yeah, maybe I can start on that. In theory, I think online conferences are great for many reasons. I think if we think about environmental friendliness, less traveling, and for people that have troubles to get a visa to travel to a conference or have limited funding, and the flexibility to attend a conference from home that you don't have to travel. I think these are all really important points. In reality, for me personally, I have not attended a single conference since the shelter-in-place in March, and so that is. Hopefully that will change in the future, but that was mainly related to my, the decline in working hours doing childcare, doing shelter in place where we didn't have childcare. I also have to say that exactly in that time, which I didn't mention before, but that I felt the impact a lot. That I was co-teaching with two other parents a blog course in 3 weeks where we had to teach 3 mornings, and the only way how I could manage that actually while maintaining still some work, like some of my normal working hours, was by hiring an additional nanny. So that shows that, and I still feel that I have there's a lot of things that I just put aside that I would not even touch while the shelter in place and while we didn't have childcare, for example, working on collaboration. So I was really focusing on that priority of the work. And so I'm still trying to catch up with that. And hopefully in the near future, that will then also enable to attend online conferences, which, is an advantage. We don't have to travel. On the other hand, it is when you decide to go for a conference and travel, you just dedicate the time for it. So maybe when you're at home, you can think you can do it on the side, but it doesn't usually work like that. So that's another disadvantage of not going there in person.
My experience is very similar to Ruth in this regard. Being at the conference really dedicates time to the conference 100%, and I really enjoyed the aspect of interacting with other attendees of the meeting, visiting poster sessions. That is much harder in a virtual format, both fully allocating the time to being at the meeting and interacting with other participants. As well as having no other obligations, as my children knew while I was attempting a virtual meeting that they can just open the door and find me if they needed something.
Yeah, and we have our first audience question. How did the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences change and shape the way that you mentor lab mates, and particularly women?
In case of my lab, our major adaptation has been adaptation to communication without in-person interaction, and that is something that we all miss. Reduced lab density that we are currently experiencing is not only making it harder for me to interact with members of the lab. I tried not to be here to minimize crowding in our neighborhood. But it has also made it more difficult for lab members to interact with one another and transition skills that they have that would be useful to our recent additions to the lab. So these complications, I believe, can only be addressed if we are to have proactive measures to increase lab density at UCSF and bring it above the 25% that we are currently experiencing, so that we can have more people in the lab at the same time, and that we are not rediscovering aspects that somebody else in the lab already knows how to do, but they simply cannot overlap because of the restrictions in lab density. So I think the safe return to labs in the increased capacity will greatly facilitate our ability to mentor both as peer mentors as well as faculty trainee mentors.
Yeah, just to add to this, I think for me was the change in thinking it's like, with the as Danica mentioned, with a reduced capacity in the lab, so lab members also don't interact so much with each other. So I think in general, like in my team, but in general in the Krogen lab, which is a large team, we try to, think about buddy systems, like who can we connect to each other so that nobody feels lost. I think we also, among us that are more like having a PI position, we meet on a weekly basis and think, do you know how this person is doing, this person? So we really wanted, because we don't see each other on a daily basis, so we tried, I think, to, proactively, it's like reaching out and seeing how people do, because especially during this pandemic, there's so many uncertainties, and that is associated also with, worries and concerns. And so I think we, for the better, we put more emphasis on a personal level and trying to understand how people are doing. And I think in terms of women and mothers, I have so much empathy. And, if there's any, I think we were thinking more about, and I was impressed by that, during the shelter in place, the people that are part of the Krogen Lab that have kids, they couldn't do as much, and other people were taking over. I think now, then when childcare came back for me, I tried to take some responsibilities. I think that in general, I saw a growth in the community, even though we are, further apart. And I thought it's actually a good development, and I hope this continues.
That's really great to hear. We have another audience question. How can coworkers support our colleagues with children during this time?
That is an excellent question, and it is wonderful to see coworkers thinking about how they can help working parents. I think perhaps solutions would need to be developed at an institutional level, so that flexible and solution tailored to each individual, depending on the age of their children, depending on whether they are in preschool or not, or elementary school, would help solve this problem. But it is nice to see that people are thinking of how they can help their colleagues. So my suggestion here would be reach out to parents in your team and ask them if there is anything that you can do to help, because it is likely that their needs will be very different. To me, one of the most helpful aspects of the current situation was a help that I've gotten through QBI from an exceptional program manager, Melanie Brewer, in putting together a grant application that was very complex, that required so many components, and that without that help and time that Melanie was able to put in, we would not be able to complete on time.
Maybe for time reason, I don't want to add much, because there are so many things that I agree with Danica. What I say is that I really think this is a fantastic question. Something that I also wanted to point out, because it's not, it's like I have the feeling in general it's a question like women or mothers or parents have to come up with the solutions, and that's obviously difficult, because there's anyway some work overload, and it is affecting the whole community. So hearing these questions actually is, I find this motivating and encouraging, because I feel that, that must be, we have to think about that as a science community, because if it affects one subgroup of the science community, which means that there will be in the longer term maybe less diversity, which we don't want. So thanks for raising this question, and I agree with what Danica said. I just want to add that.
Great. Another question. I hear thoughts about how the culture dictates that women take more share of childcare. Is this a time that we need to confront and challenge that culture that persists in academic medicine?
I think that is definitely an important question. I think it, again, is it's a family dependent situation. In my case, my spouse is a critical worker and has to work from site. So that is restricting how my ability to work from work as opposed to working from home. So I really think that this would depend from case to case, just like many of the flexible solutions that we need at this time to meet the needs of different problems that we're encountering.
Yeah, I think while I have to say that I see already some change in society. I'm fortunate my husband really took 50% responsibility. And in fact, I have to say that from his employer, like the director of his unit, he actually stated, like a man, and I was really impressed to hear that he's like, okay, I have a child at home, I work 3 to 4 hours a day, and that's my expectation of you. So he was actually more relaxed than me, I have to say, because in fact, I tried to, I felt like I still have to try to get full-time productivity. So I was doing long hours in the nights, and which led to sleep deprivation. And I thought that was good to hear that, that there's this open communication and acknowledgement of the situation. But that's also like for me, the personal situation. And I think in many cases that in many parts that is not necessarily the case. And I hope that there will be continuous change, that this will be shared responsibilities, and also a cultural shift there that men take over more responsibilities.
Yeah, it's great to hear that that at least on the personal level that like these conversations are happening, and things seem to be moving in the right direction, hopefully. How do you balance bringing up childcare duties and challenges with keeping coworkers from seeing you mainly through the lens of being a mother?
This is an excellent question, and one without an easy answer, right? I think what would help here really is to see more dads with their children on Zoom meetings, and pandemic and especially shelter in place, at least within my interacting network, has shown me many dads that had baby carriers while on a Zoom call. So I think normalizing childcare in that way by including dads that participate too will probably help that cultural shift and acceptance of parents as both parents and scientists at the same time, rather than viewing them through the lens of a parent only.
Yeah, I totally agree. Nothing to add.
Yeah, that is a tough question. And so I would love to hear so you talked a little bit about how you both believe that this sort of this issue right now really demands individualized solutions. And I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that, or if there are other ways that you wish that people would begin to think or talk about these issues in a different way than we already are.
Yeah.
Maybe I can. Oh, I don't know. Should I start? So I definitely think there should be an individualized solution, and this, that depends on, I think, age of kids that you have, because different, infants versus toddlers versus I think kids in school have totally different needs for childcare. But then I think something that I thought about is it also should individualize for the stage of your career, because if you are in your PhD or postdoc versus the PI, you have many different needs there. So for example, if you're an experimental PhD or postdoc, you need to go to the lab to advance your career. So you would maybe need, what would be good, but if you cannot because you have to take childcare duties, maybe it would help to have a research assistant helping out. Versus for Danix and me, and it's probably easier to stay at home. We don't do too much bench work anymore. But then we need support in other ways. Like for example, I mean, besides childcare, which I think is the biggest one, but I could think about, well, if it's a problem that we don't have so much time writing grants or manuscript, can that be facilitated, this process, as Danica pointed out, like working with a project manager to help putting a grant together, having an editor or an illustrator helping to put, just to take some time away from the daily task. And that, so, and I think this needs to be individualized in terms of, the age of the kids, but also the career stage. And but I also want to point out is that, for example, what I mentioned during the time that I had to do teaching duties, that we hired a nanny who took over responsibilities in the mornings, and that was, for me, that was for us financially possible. Now, if you think about the life of a PhD and postdoc, that's completely probably different, especially living in cities like San Francisco. You have kids, so you have other births, and so these are all these points I think for me show how important is it to, there's no one solution fits all. And that makes it also more difficult to come up with a solution, I think.
I fully agree with what Ruth had said. It is our responsibility as an institution to ensure that we have tailored solutions, including financial ones, that will help particularly our trainees with children who are in most challenging situation this time, as they need to be able to be in the lab, to advance their progress to their training, while being able to afford safe childcare options for their dependent care.
Yeah, thank you both for those answers. It's really great to hear that level of detail and specificity about real solutions that could be implemented right now. And I think we are out of time. And if any audience members have additional questions, please put them in the comment box below, not in the live chat box. And we will read your questions. Yeah, thank you both for being here. And if you have any final thoughts, go ahead.
Thank you, Leila, for discussing this very important topic.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's good to raise awareness, and I feel with seeing a lot of papers already or published articles that raise the awareness that we have this problem, and it potentially lead in the future to more widening of the gap between. Especially between women's and male. I think organizing this discussion session, I think it's really great, and I hope it steers also some thinking how that this situation can be supported.
Great. Well, thank you both, and thank you to everyone who joined us, and we'll see you next week.